What if I told you that the people who try to manipulate, gaslight, or control you only have power because you let them? What if I showed you how to become so strong, so grounded, and so clear in yourself that no one could ever harm you emotionally again? Let's start softly, because real strength doesn't arrive loudly. It doesn't kick the door open. It sits down beside you and tells the truth. If you've ever left a conversation feeling confused, smaller, or strangely guilty, if you've ever replayed your words in your head wondering what you did wrong, this isn't because you're weak. It's often because you were dealing with someone who knows how to manipulate clarity, exploit empathy, and benefit from your self-doubt. This isn't about demonizing people. It's about recognizing patterns and choosing yourself without losing your humanity. There is a quiet moment most of us learn to ignore, a subtle tightening in the chest, a hesitation that doesn't have words yet. Manipulative behavior depends on you overriding that signal. You're told you're overthinking, too sensitive, too emotional. Strength begins the moment you stop arguing with your own inner knowing. You don't need evidence to honor discomfort. You don't need permission to pause. Trusting yourself is not selfish, it's self-respect. Over time, something else happens. You get tired of explaining how you feel, of turning pain into a presentation, of hoping that if you choose better words, they'll finally understand. But some people don't misunderstand you. They benefit from misunderstanding you. And so strength looks like this. You state what you feel without defending it. You set boundaries without over-explaining them. You realize that no doesn't need a paragraph to be valid. At some point, you learn the difference between detachment and coldness. Detachment isn't indifference, it's not punishment. It's choosing not to hand your emotional center to someone who mishandles it. You stop reacting in real time. You stop correcting their version of reality. You stop chasing closure from people who need you unsettled to feel in control. You remain kind, but no longer accessible to harm. There's also a grief many people don't talk about, the hope that one day the person who hurt you will finally see it, that they'll understand, that they'll say the words you needed. Waiting for that moment keeps you tethered. Freedom begins when you realize you don't need the source of the wound to confirm the truth of the pain. Your clarity does not require their agreement. As you grow stronger, you will disappoint people, especially those who benefited from your silence, your flexibility, your self-abandonment. This is one of the hardest lessons. Being willing to let someone be upset without rushing to fix it is emotional maturity. You learn that protecting your peace may cost you approval, and that's a price worth paying. Eventually, you stop choosing drama as a form of engagement. You realize you don't heal by replaying conversations in your head or by winning arguments no one admits to losing. Sometimes the bravest choice is distance, not as avoidance, but as discernment. Silence in this context is not weakness, it's self-respect. And then something shifts. You begin to build a life that is full, not perfect, full, with purpose, grounding, and values that don't change based on who's in the room. When your inner world is rich, manipulation has nowhere to land. You don't need approval to survive. You don't need chaos to feel alive. Wholeness becomes your protection. Becoming strong was never about becoming hard. It was never about fighting evil with force. It was about coming home to yourself, to your instincts, to your limits, to the part of you that knows when something costs too much. When you stand there calm, rooted, self-trusting, those who rely on confusion, guilt, and emotional instability lose their power, not because you defeated them, but because you stopped offering yourself as a place for harm to live. And that kind of strength is quiet, but it is unbreakable. Trusting your inner signals is often the first ability to erode when you've spent time around manipulation. Discomfort becomes something you learn to argue with instead of listen to. You feel a tightening in your chest, a sudden drop in energy, a sense of unease you can't fully explain, and almost immediately you begin negotiating with it. You tell yourself you're being dramatic. You search for logic to override what your body already knows. You wait for more evidence, more clarity, more permission. Over time, this habit teaches you to distrust yourself long before you distrust anyone else. Discomfort is not chaos. It is data. It arrives quietly long before harm becomes obvious. Your nervous system is designed to detect misalignment faster than your rational mind can explain it. It notices tone shifts, inconsistencies, subtle violations of safety. When something feels off, it's rarely random. Yet people who manipulate rely on your willingness to dismiss these early signals. They encourage you to intellectualize what you feel, to debate it, to minimize it. They benefit when you stay confused just long enough to cross your own boundaries. Many people were taught that being strong means pushing through discomfort, staying polite, staying agreeable, staying silent. Especially if you learned early that peace depended on keeping others comfortable, your inner signals may have been framed as inconvenience rather than guidance. You may have learned that discomfort was something to suppress, not respect, but ignoring internal warnings doesn't make you resilient. It makes you vulnerable to people who know how to exploit your self-doubt. There is a difference between fear and intuition, though they are often confused. Fear is loud and urgent. It pulls you into imagined futures. Intuition is calm, steady, and present. It doesn't shout. It simply says, pay attention. When you feel discomfort without panic, without drama, without a clear story attached, that's often intuition asking you to slow down. Not everything that harms you arrives as a crisis. Much of it arrives as subtle misalignment you feel but can't yet name. One of the most damaging effects of gaslighting is that it trains you to distrust this internal voice. You are told that what you feel isn't real, that your perception is flawed, that your reactions are the problem. Over time, you stop checking in with yourself and start outsourcing your reality. You wait for others to confirm whether something is acceptable, whether you're allowed to feel unsettled, whether your experience counts. This is not humility. It is disconnection from self. Rebuilding trust with your inner signals takes patience. At first, honoring discomfort may feel unsafe. You may worry that listening to it will make you selfish, difficult, or isolated. You may fear that if you acknowledge it, you'll have to act on it, and action feels overwhelming. But trusting your signals doesn't always require immediate decisions. Sometimes it simply means noticing, naming the feeling privately, giving yourself space instead of pushing forward automatically. Discomfort does not demand explanation. It does not need to be logical to be valid. You are allowed to pause without understanding everything. You are allowed to change your mind without defending it. When you stop forcing yourself to override internal resistance, your body begins to relax. Clarity follows safety, not pressure. The more you honor small signals, the stronger your self-trust becomes. People who are disconnected from their inner signals are easier to manipulate because they can be talked out of their own experience. They rely on external narratives to tell them who they are, what they should tolerate, what they deserve. When you trust yourself, confusion loses its grip. You no longer need to argue internally about whether something is acceptable. You feel it, and that feeling matters. Trusting your inner signals doesn't mean assuming bad intentions or seeing danger everywhere. It means respecting your internal boundaries before they are crossed repeatedly. It means recognizing that your body keeps score long before your mind catches up. When something drains you, unsettles you, or leaves you feeling smaller, that information deserves your attention. You don't have to accuse, you don't have to explain, you simply have to listen. As you practice this, your relationship with yourself changes. You stop abandoning your own experience for the sake of harmony. You stop negotiating your limits internally. You begin to feel steadier, more anchored, less reactive. Decisions become quieter, less charged. You notice when something costs too much energy, even if it looks acceptable on the surface. You begin to trust that you don't need to fully understand a situation to respect your response to it. Stopping the habit of over-explaining your emotions and boundaries is one of the most uncomfortable shifts you can make, especially if you were raised to believe that being understood is the same as being safe. Over-explaining often begins as a sincere attempt to connect. You want to be clear. You want to be fair. You want to prevent conflict. So you add context, soften your words, explain your history, anticipate objections, and try to manage how the other person will feel about what you're saying. What looks like communication on the surface is often self-protection shaped by fear. Many people learn early that their feelings are only acceptable if they can be justified. You weren't allowed to simply be hurt or uncomfortable. You had to prove it. So as an adult, when you set a boundary, your instinct is to defend it before it's even questioned. You explain why you're tired, why you can't do this, why this doesn't work for you, why you're not trying to hurt anyone. You offer reassurance instead of clarity, and slowly the focus shifts away from your need and toward managing someone else's reaction. The problem is that over-explaining creates openings for manipulation. When someone is committed to misunderstanding you, more words don't bring clarity, they bring leverage. Your reasons become something to argue with. Your feelings become something to debate. Your boundary becomes a puzzle they can solve or dismantle. Instead of being heard, you find yourself negotiating your own limits. What began as honesty turns into exhaustion. There is a quiet difference between explaining to be understood and explaining to be accepted. The first is grounded. The second is anxious. When you explain yourself because you don't trust that your no will stand on its own, you are handing your authority away, you are asking for permission to honor your own experience. Over time, this trains you to believe that your feelings are only valid if they make sense to others. Learning to stop over-explaining can feel abrupt at first. It may feel rude, selfish, or unsafe. You might worry that you'll be misunderstood or judged, but misunderstanding is not the same as harm. Discomfort in others does not mean you've done something wrong. When you say less, you are not being unkind, you are being clear. A boundary does not need to be persuasive, it needs to be honest. There is also grief in this shift. You may realize how often you hoped that if you explained yourself well enough, someone would finally treat you with care. Letting go of that hope can feel like loss. But clarity doesn't come from being perfectly understood. It comes from being aligned with yourself. When you stop explaining, you begin to notice who respects you without needing a detailed justification. That information matters. Simplicity is not aggression. Saying, "I'm not comfortable with that," is not an attack. Saying, "I can't do this anymore," is not a betrayal. When you stop filling the silence with reasons, you give your words weight. You allow them to stand as statements rather than invitations for debate. You begin to trust that you don't need to convince someone to honor your limits. Over-explaining often masks a deeper fear of being seen as difficult, but being clear about your boundaries will always disappoint someone who benefited from your lack of them. That disappointment is not your responsibility to manage. When you stop cushioning your truth, you make space for relationships that don't require self-erasure to function. As you practice this, you may notice how your body responds: less tension, less rehearsing conversations in your head, less anxiety before speaking. You begin to feel steadier, more rooted, less dependent on how your words land. You speak from the present instead of defending the past or predicting the future. You learn that your emotions do not need to be palatable to be real, and your boundaries do not need to be liked to be necessary. With time, saying less becomes an act of self-trust. You stop performing your pain. You stop translating your needs into something more acceptable. You let your truth be simple, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's quiet, even when it's met with silence instead of agreement. Detaching without losing your compassion is a skill that often feels contradictory at first, especially if you've learned to equate closeness with care. Many people believe that to love, to be kind, to be emotionally mature, they must remain fully available, endlessly patient, and deeply affected by what others do. Detachment challenges that belief. It asks you to stay human without staying entangled, to remain open-hearted without remaining exposed. Detachment is not indifference. It is not punishment. It is not shutting down. It is the decision to stop placing your emotional well, being in environments that repeatedly destabilize you. You can care about someone and still recognize that their behavior costs you too much. You can understand someone's pain without making it your responsibility to absorb it. Compassion does not require self-abandonment. For many people, emotional attachment becomes fused with identity. You feel responsible for fixing, soothing, explaining, or rescuing. When someone is upset, you rush in. When there is conflict, you feel it in your body as urgency. Detachment interrupts this pattern. It invites you to pause before reacting, to notice what is being asked of you emotionally, and to choose whether you can give without losing yourself. This pause can feel uncomfortable. You may feel guilt for not responding immediately, fear for not engaging, or anxiety about being perceived as cold. But detachment is not about withholding love. It is about withholding access to your emotional core when it is being mishandled. When you stay constantly reactive, you remain inside someone else's emotional weather. Detachment allows you to step out of that storm without closing your heart. Compassion without detachment often turns into exhaustion. You listen longer than you should. You explain more than is healthy. You tolerate behaviors that slowly erode your sense of self. Over time, resentment builds not because you are unkind, but because you gave more than you had. Detachment restores balance. It allows you to care in ways that are sustainable rather than self-sacrificing. One of the quiet strengths of detachment is that it ends power struggles without confrontation. You stop trying to correct distorted narratives. You stop defending your character. You stop chasing understanding from someone who thrives on confusion. This doesn't mean you agree with what's being said. It means you no longer need to engage with it. Your silence is not passive. It is intentional. Detaching also changes how you see others. Instead of reacting to their behavior as a personal failure or attack, you begin to see patterns. You recognize where their actions come from without needing to excuse them. This clarity allows compassion to exist without entanglement. You can acknowledge someone's limitations without making them your burden to carry. There is a difference between caring and caretaking. Caring respects your limits. Caretaking ignores them. Detachment helps you stay on the side of caring. You remain kind, but you are no longer endlessly available. You listen, but you don't absorb. You show empathy, but you don't surrender your stability to prove it. As detachment becomes more familiar, your nervous system begins to settle. You no longer live in constant anticipation of someone else's moods or reactions. You stop bracing for impact. You feel less urgency to respond, less pressure to fix. This creates space for thoughtful responses instead of emotional reflexes. Detaching without losing compassion means choosing presence over reactivity. It means allowing others to have their feelings without making those feelings your responsibility. It means recognizing that love does not require access to every part of you. Some parts of you are meant to be protected, not offered indiscriminately. Over time, this kind of detachment deepens your humanity rather than diminishing it. You become less hardened, not more. You are no longer ruled by guilt or obligation. Your compassion becomes cleaner, steadier, and more honest. It is given freely, not extracted through pressure or confusion. Releasing the need for validation from those who hurt you is one of the most difficult and liberating shifts you can make. It asks you to let go of a hope that feels reasonable, even human. The hope that if the other person truly understood what they did, something inside you would finally settle. Many people stay emotionally tied not because they want the relationship back, but because they want acknowledgement. They want their pain to be seen by the person who caused it. They want the story to end with understanding. That desire makes sense. Being hurt often creates a fracture in your sense of reality. You replay conversations, search for moments you could have explained yourself better. Imagine how it might feel if they finally said the right words. Validation promises relief. It promises closure. But when the person you're waiting on benefits from denial, minimization, or confusion, that validation never arrives or arrives distorted, conditional, or incomplete, the danger is not just that you don't receive validation. The danger is that you begin to measure your healing by their response. You stay emotionally reactive to their tone, their silence, their refusal to take responsibility. Your inner world becomes dependent on someone who has already shown they are not safe with it. This keeps the wound open longer than it needs to be. Releasing the need for validation does not mean pretending you weren't hurt. It means recognizing that your experience does not require approval to be real. Pain is not a courtroom. You do not need a verdict for what you felt to count. When you wait for someone else to confirm your reality, you delay your own authority over it. Often, the need for validation is tied to self-doubt planted during the harm itself. Gaslighting, blame, shifting, and emotional manipulation leave you questioning your memory and judgment. You may crave validation because part of you is still unsure whether you're allowed to trust yourself. Letting go of that need is an act of rebuilding self-trust. It's choosing to believe your own experience even when it is not mirrored back to you. This process involves grief. There is a real loss in accepting that the person who hurt you may never understand, apologize, or change. Grief is the cost of clarity. You grieve not only what happened, but what you hope would happen afterward. Allowing that grief to exist is healthier than staying emotionally stuck in expectation. When you release the need for validation, you stop performing your pain in hopes it will be acknowledged. You stop explaining it over and over, refining it, softening it, trying to make it palatable. You no longer need to prove how much something affected you. You begin to honor your experience privately, where it is safer and more honest. This shift also changes how much power others have over you. Their indifference no longer determines your worth. Their denial no longer defines your reality. You may still feel sadness or anger, But those feelings no longer control your sense of self. You are no longer waiting for permission to move on. Letting go of validation does not harden you. It steadies you. It allows your healing to come from within rather than from someone who has already shown you their limitations. You learn that closure is not something another person gives you. It is something you claim when you stop asking those who hurt you to carry the weight of your healing. As this need fades, something quieter takes its place: self-recognition. You see yourself clearly. You know what you endured. You trust the truth of your own experience. That trust becomes a form of grounding that no one else can take from you. Allowing others to be disappointed without betraying yourself is one of the clearest signs of emotional maturity, yet it is often one of the hardest skills to practice. Many people were taught, directly or indirectly, that being good meant being agreeable, accommodating, and easy to live with. Disappointment from others felt dangerous, like a signal that love or safety might be withdrawn. So you learn to manage reactions, soften boundaries, and overextend yourself to keep the peace. Over time, this pattern taught you that your needs were negotiable, but other people's comfort was not. When you begin to change, disappointment becomes unavoidable. The moment you stop overgiving, stop saying yes when you mean no, or stop tolerating what hurts, someone will feel it. Their reaction may be subtle or overt. It may come as silence, guilt, criticism, or accusations of selfishness. This is often the moment where self-betrayal has historically stepped in. You second-guess yourself. You explain more than necessary. You undo the boundary to restore approval. Learning to tolerate this discomfort is a form of strength. Disappointment does not mean you have done something wrong. It often means you have stopped doing something that was unsustainable for you. Other people's reactions are not reliable measures of your integrity. They are reflections of their expectations, not your obligations. There is a deep difference between harming someone and disappointing them. Harm violates dignity. Disappointment simply disrupts preference. When you confuse the two, you carry responsibility that does not belong to you. You begin to prioritize emotional comfort over emotional honesty. Allowing disappointment means accepting that you cannot be everything to everyone without losing yourself in the process. Self-betrayal often shows up quietly. You feel it as tension in your body, resentment you can't explain, fatigue that doesn't go away with rest. Each time you override your own limits to avoid disappointing someone, you reinforce the belief that your needs are less important. Over time, this erodes self-trust. You become disconnected from what you actually want, because you're constantly adjusting to what others expect. Letting someone be disappointed requires you to stay present with your own discomfort. You resist the urge to fix, justify, or overfunction. You remind yourself that other adults are capable of managing their feelings. You do not rush in to rescue them from the emotional consequences of your honesty. This is not cruelty, it is respect for them and for yourself. As you practice this, you may notice fear arise: fear of being seen as selfish, fear of conflict, fear of abandonment. These fears often come from earlier experiences where disappointment had real consequences. Acknowledging that history without letting it control your present is part of healing. You are no longer that powerless version of yourself. You have more choice now. Allowing disappointment also clarifies relationships. Some connections adapt. They adjust. They learn to meet you with respect. Others reveal that they were built on your compliance. This information, while painful, is valuable. It shows you where your presence was conditional on self-erasure. Choosing not to betray yourself does not mean you stop caring about others. It means you stop caring at your own expense. You learn that your well-being is not negotiable. Over time, standing by yourself becomes less dramatic and more natural. You feel steadier, less resentful, more aligned. Disappointment loses its power when you no longer interpret it as a failure of who you are. You can hold your ground gently. You can remain kind without giving yourself away. In doing so, you teach yourself that self-respect is not something you earn by pleasing others. It is something you practice by honoring your own limits. Choosing distance instead of emotional drama is a practice that requires both courage and clarity. Many people have been taught that being available for everyone's moods, conflicts, and crisis is a measure of care or loyalty. You may have learned to step into arguments, absorb blame, or constantly clarify yourself in order to keep the peace. Over time, this creates a pattern where your energy is consumed by the emotional storms of others, leaving little space for your own stability or clarity. Emotional drama often feeds itself, And by participating, you inadvertently become part of the cycle. Distance is not avoidance, though it can feel like it at first. It is a conscious choice to protect your well-being and preserve your inner calm. It means recognizing when engagement no longer serves understanding, resolution, or mutual respect, but only perpetuates confusion and exhaustion. It is stepping back from repetitive arguments, unproductive explanations, and conversations that drain you without giving anything in return. Choosing distance allows you to witness reality clearly rather than reacting reflexively to someone else's chaos. At first, stepping back may feel uncomfortable or even guilty. You may worry that you are being perceived as cold, uncaring, or selfish. You may question whether you should give just one more chance or explain yourself one more time. These are familiar pressures for anyone who has prioritized harmony over personal boundaries. The discomfort, however, is not a signal that you are doing wrong. It is simply the tension of redefining how much of yourself you are willing to offer without losing ground. Distance gives you perspective. When you are no longer entangled in the whirlwind of someone else's emotional turbulence, you can observe patterns you could not see before. You notice which behaviors are consistent, which words are manipulative, and which dynamics are unhealthy. This clarity is impossible when you are constantly reacting. Distance transforms your attention from external chaos to internal stability. It also allows you to conserve energy for what matters most, your own values, your own peace, and relationships that are reciprocal rather than draining. When you stop feeding into drama, you no longer provide the emotional fuel that some people rely on to maintain control or dominance. You reclaim power quietly, without confrontation, without argument, and without resentment. The choice to step back is not passive, it is deliberate and protective. Choosing distance does not mean that you stop caring. You can still empathize, understand, and hold compassion for someone else's struggles while refusing to absorb them into your own emotional life. This is the essence of healthy boundaries. You care from a place of strength, not from a place of depletion. You maintain your kindness without making it contingent on chaos. Over time, this practice changes your relationships. Some people adapt, learning to interact without creating unnecessary tension. Others reveal that their presence was conditional on access to your energy and emotional labor. Both outcomes are valuable because they teach you which connections are sustainable and which are not. Distance allows you to participate in life from a place of choice, not obligation. The more you practice stepping back from drama, the more natural it becomes. You begin to recognize the signs early, the attempts to provoke, the cycles of conflict, the manipulative appeals. You respond less to urgency and more to reality. You feel less reactive and more steady. Your decisions are guided by discernment rather than impulse. In this way, distance is not a retreat. It is a position of strength. By choosing distance over emotional drama, you protect your energy, preserve your clarity, and cultivate resilience. You no longer carry unnecessary burdens. You no longer absorb emotions that are not yours to carry. You create space to engage with life on your own terms, to respond thoughtfully instead of reacting automatically, and to honor your own needs without guilt. This practice transforms how you relate to the world, to others, and most importantly, to yourself. Building a full, grounded inner life that leaves no room for manipulation is the most quiet and powerful form of strength. Many people spend their energy trying to control the external world, hoping to prevent conflict, earn approval, or secure validation, and in doing so, they leave their inner world empty and vulnerable. When your sense of worth, peace, and purpose is dependent on others' reactions or approval, manipulation finds fertile ground. Someone else's mood, opinion, or dishonesty can easily destabilize you because you have built a life outside of yourself that relies on their participation. A grounded inner life begins with self-knowledge. You know your values, your boundaries, and the principles that guide your decisions. You are aware of what nourishes you and what drains you. This awareness does not make you rigid or unfeeling. It gives you a stable reference point when chaos appears. When you are rooted internally, external attempts to manipulate, gaslight, or control simply cannot find purchase. Your compass is internal, not borrowed from others' approval or perception. Filling your inner life also requires cultivating meaning and purpose that is independent of immediate validation. This might come through your work, creative pursuits, relationships that are healthy, or personal growth practices. The more full your inner world is, The less dependent you are on external drama or attention to feel alive. Fulfillment becomes a self-generated resource, a reserve that others cannot easily deplete. You stop performing, over-explaining or negotiating your peace because you have already claimed it internally. A rich inner life also includes emotional literacy and resilience. You can recognize your feelings, name them, and respond to them without projecting them outward in harmful ways or allowing them to be hijacked by others. Emotional awareness creates immunity to manipulation because you understand your triggers and your needs. When you feel threatened, confused, or provoked, you can pause, reflect, and act from clarity rather than reaction. Others' attempts to distort your reality or exploit your empathy no longer succeed because you are anchored in self-understanding. Grounding yourself internally does not mean isolating yourself from others or avoiding connection. It means that your interactions are deliberate rather than reactive. You maintain boundaries without guilt, respond with compassion without losing your core, and engage in relationships that are reciprocal rather than extractive. This inner stability allows you to be generous and kind without being vulnerable to exploitation. You give freely because you choose to, not because you are trying to secure safety, approval, or love from someone else. Another aspect of a grounded inner life is the cultivation of presence. You are able to exist fully in each moment without being constantly preoccupied by what others think or how they might act. Presence reduces the effectiveness of manipulation because it prevents you from being drawn into distractions, emotional hooks, or guilt trips. When you are fully in your own experience, external attempts to control you become background noise rather than directives you feel compelled to follow. The fullness of your inner life also creates resilience to stress, criticism, and disappointment. You no longer need validation to know your worth. You no longer measure your safety, success, or integrity by how others respond. You are whole enough to navigate conflict with composure, to set limits without over-explaining, and to disengage from toxic interactions without fear. This independence of spirit is one of the most protective forms of strength. As you cultivate a grounded inner life, manipulation loses its power naturally. You are less reactive, less anxious, less susceptible to coercion, and more capable of acting with clarity. You can maintain empathy without surrendering your boundaries, and you can engage in meaningful relationships without becoming a target for exploitation. In this way, building yourself from the inside out becomes not only a strategy for protection, but also a path toward lasting peace and freedom. True strength is not measured by how much you can endure or how fiercely you can defend yourself. It is measured by how fully you live in alignment with who you are, how clearly you honor your boundaries, and how deeply you trust yourself. When you cultivate trust, clarity, detachment, self-respect, and a full inner life, harm loses its power over you. The people who rely on manipulation, guilt, or chaos can no longer find purchase because you are rooted in your own truth. Choosing yourself is not selfish. It is the ultimate act of courage. Stand steady, protect your peace. Live your life so fully and clearly that no one's darkness can dim your light.